Welcome to a series where we talk about the World Cup histories of each nation at the 2026 World Cup. Today we'll be talking about maybe the most purely fun national team to follow, at least in my opinion. Japan's soccer culture is unique and has led to some beautiful play, great goals, dynamic stars, and fun World Cup runs, even if they've yet to have the breakthrough they deserve. Let's go through their history ahead of what could be that breakthrough run at North America 2026. Our story begins at the very first World Cup, Uruguay 1930, and Japan was supposed to be there. It's gonna feel unbelievable the further we get into this video, but Japan was meant to be at the inaugural World Cup. They would withdraw before it began though, alongside Thailand, making it so there was no Asian representation at the first World Cup. Japan wouldn't attempt to qualify for Italy 1934, then for France 1938, they would withdraw before a playoff against the Dutch East Indies thanks to the Chinese-Japanese War that ended up being part of World War II. And then, World War II happened. Everything was fucking horrible. The Japanese Empire got literally nuked out of existence, and the rebuild from this was long and arduous. The team was, of course, banned from Brazil in 1950. Maybe they shouldn't have tried to invade the entire Western Pacific. Then they would get their first shot at World Cup glory for Switzerland 1954. This amounted to a playoff against South Korea, with the winner getting the ticket, and Japan lost 5-1 in Tokyo to immediately put themselves in a massive hole. The second game was also played in Tokyo because the South Korean government wouldn't let the Japanese players into their borders, and this game ended in a draw, sending South Korea through to the World Cup and leaving Japan behind. The next few cycles were very forgettable. Japan wouldn't enter qualification for Sweden 1958 or England 1966, and the campaign for Chile 1962 was brief. It was another playoff against South Korea, this time actually a home and home, and the Koreans won both legs to eliminate Japan. Qualification for Mexico 1970 was similar, but Japan this time being in a three-team group with Australia and, of course, South Korea. In this group, Japan would draw to and lose to, finishing in last place and being eliminated again. The Asian qualifiers for West Germany in 1974 were a bit more complicated than they needed to be, considering it was all for just one spot. The top two teams of two groups would move on to a semi-final, and after winning the semi-final and final, that winner would then play another team from the other side of the Confederation. Not that Japan would experience all that, although they would advance out their initial group in second place at least, behind Hong Kong but ahead of South Vietnam. In the playoffs, Japan would play against Israel, and an extra time goal by Moshe Anane would break the deadlock and eliminate Japan from the World Cup again. For Argentina in 1978, Japan would be grouped with South Korea and Israel, with the winner advancing to a final group. That winner was not Japan. They lost 3 of their 4 games, scored 0 goals, finished at the bottom of the group. Japan is completely irrelevant in Asian soccer. España 1982 was similarly fruitless, with the Japanese advancing past an initial group ahead of Macau into a 4-team knockout stage. Here, they lost their semi-final round to North Korea, once again falling well short of the World Cup. Why is Japan so ass? As you may expect, it's a similar answer to the United States. Japanese are busy, dude. Besides just printing money all throughout the 60s and 70s and 80s, Japanese athletes are playing baseball at this time, with the sport growing exponentially in the country on their way to becoming genuine competitors with the US for talent output. Soccer was slowly starting to gain traction on the islands at this point, but it was a slow climb and we're just getting started. For Mexico 1986, Japan would begin in a group with North Korea and Singapore, and this is where Japan would finally begin to show out as legitimate contenders out in Asia. They won 3 of 4 games here, knocking out the North Koreans and entering a 4-team knockout, with the winner getting ticket to the World Cup. Up against Hong Kong in the semifinals, Samurai Blue would prevail 3-0 in Kobe, with a 2-1 win in Hong Kong more than sufficing in advancing Japan to the final. Here they met a familiar rival, South Korea, and after falling 2-1 in Tokyo, you may be thinking Japan is cooked. You're right, they lost 1-0 in Seoul and were once again eliminated from qualification, still never having reached the World Cup even once. For Italia 90 qualifying, Japan would be grouped with North Korea, Hong Kong, and Indonesia, with the winner advancing to a final group stage. And goddamn, this Japanese team deserved to play it, specifically Italian 90. They drew 0-0 in Hong Kong, 0-0 in Jakarta, 0-0 at home against Hong Kong, and in combination with a 2-0 loss in Pyongyang, Japan would fall short of qualification to the final round at the hands of the glorious motherland. Here's the exact part in the video where Japan gets serious about soccer. Everything we know about Japanese soccer is built brick by brick starting now. The J-League has just been founded, this is real now. It's not an easy journey, but it's better than perpetually being on the same level as North Korea. Qualifying for USA 94 began in a group with UAE, Thailand, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, and this time qualifying from this group was no issue. The reigning Asian champion Japanese won 7 of 8 games here, beating out the Emirates for a spot in the final group stage. An Asian mini-hex, single round robin, all games played in Doha. Sorry in advance, Japanese fans. This started poorly, with the teams drawing 0-0 against Saudi Arabia and then losing to Iran. Beating North Korea got the Japanese back on track though, but up next was South Korea, and this was important. Japan would win this 1-0 thanks to a goal from Kazuyoshi Miura, a dude nicknamed King Kazu, and rightfully so because good god, this guy is still active. He's 26, he's in his prime all the way back here in 1993, and the dude is still playing now in 2026 at almost 60. Just unreal. Thanks to the scattershot results of the group, Japan was in a top 2 spot and Asia had 2 spots to give out. If Japan won this last game against Iraq, it didn't matter what anyone else did. King Kazu put him on pace to do this with a very early goal, but the Iraqis would hit back after halftime. With both South Korea and Saudi Arabia winning, it became increasingly known that Japan had to win this game in order to qualify. Luckily, Masashi Nakayama would put the Japanese back ahead in the 69th minute with a nice finish, and they would hold this lead all the way until stoppage time. All the way until substitute Jafar Amran scored off a corner, ending the game 2-2, a draw. Japan would finish the campaign 1 point behind Saudi Arabia and tied with South Korea, falling to 3rd place behind the Koreans on goal difference. This night is called the Agony of Doha because Japan would once again fail to qualify for the World Cup, coming basically as close as possible to qualifying and coming up short. The good news is Japanese soccer was beginning to rise and they would put in a bid to host the 2002 World Cup. Ultimately, the race came down to Japan and South Korea, and some dumb backroom stuff led to the 2 countries co-hosting the event, despite hating each other. Japan had never qualified for the World Cup, but if they couldn't make it to France 98, at least they were guaranteed a spot for 2002. France 98 would have 3 automatic spots for Asian teams and a 4th spot in the Intercontinental Playoffs, damn near doubling the chances of making it for Japan. They would initially be drawn into a group with Oman, Nepal, and Macau, and this was obviously a 2-team race between Japan and Oman. Japan would win the group opener in Muscat and hold the lead throughout this group stage, drawing in Tokyo on the final day to clinch their spot in the next round. Another group stage awaited where Japan would play against South Korea, Uzbekistan, the United Arab Emirates, and Kazakhstan, who's not in UEFA yet. The winner here got a ticket to the World Cup, and second place would survive to fight another day. Japan started well, rolling up a 6-3 victory on Uzbekistan, but the results that followed were poor to say the least. A 0-0 draw in Abu Dhabi, a home loss to South Korea, and most damning, a 1-1 draw in Almaty against the Kazakhs. This put Japan in 3rd place halfway through the campaign, even behind the UAE. They drew again after this in Tashkent against Uzbekistan this time, and then drew again in the critical home game against the Emirates. Things looked grim. Japan was still behind the Emiratis in the standings with only 2 games to go, and then the impossible happened. Japan won in Seoul. After beating Kazakhstan 5-1 at home in the final game, and the Emirates collected 1 point from their final 2 games, Japan had rescued this campaign by the skin of their teeth. They still finished well behind South Korea, but in 2nd place they would move on to a playoff against the other 2nd place team in Asia. For the winner, a spot in the World Cup. For the loser, a spot in the Intercontinental Playoffs. With everything on the line, Japan would play Iran. 1 game for everything in neutral Johor Bahru, and what a game. Masashi Nakayama struck just before halftime to give Samurai Blue the lead, and they led it until the break, but a disaster on the other side of halftime let Karadad Azizi equalize for Team Meli. A nice header from Ali Dai would give Iran a second half lead, completing their comeback and putting Japan on the brink of agony. This is where manager Takeshi Okada made his money. He subbed on Shoji Joe and Masayuki Kano, 2 forwards, and Joe would level Japan in the 75th minute to eventually force extra time. Here, Japan dominated, but Okano missed chance after chance. Even Japanese fans were like, who the fuck is this guy? Where's King Kazu? But in the 118th minute, with penalties approaching, Okano would score a golden goal to finally, at long last, send Japan to their first ever World Cup. Well, that was agonizing, but we finally got here. Japan has made it to France, although they've done so without King Kazu, leaving him home never to play in a World Cup in his career. Japan would be drawn in a very unique group, getting Argentina out of Pot 1, debutantes Croatia out of Europe, and then a third debutant, Jamaica, out of the Caribbean. 3 World Cup virgins in one group is kind of wild in the year 1998, but it meant the race for second was theoretically wide open. Unfortunately for Japan, they would have to open their World Cup account against Argentina, a good Argentine team too, and while Samurai Blue put up a fight in their first ever game at the highest level, they would concede pretty early. A mistake by Hiroshi Nanami led the dangerous Gabriel Batistuta in on goal, and that was that. Japan had opportunities towards the end, but they weren't able to hit on any of them. Definitely might have helped if King Kazu was here, but yeah, their first ever World Cup game was a respectable but fruitless 1-0 loss to Argentina in Toulouse. Japan's next game was in hot-ass Nantes against Croatia, and this was a crucial one. Both defenses would hold for most of the game, with Croatia having more of the opportunities, but the Japanese defense would finally snap in the 77th minute. Davor Šuker was just too good at this tournament to deny, and he would give the Checkers the 1-0 win and eliminate Japan then and there. Despite their hard work, Japan had 0 goals, 0 points, and were playing for pride in 3rd place in the group in their final game against the Reggae Boys. Despite this final group game being a dead rubber between two nations mostly unknown in football at the time, those in Lyon who went to the game were treated to a good one. Jamaica came out roaring, with Theodore Whitmore striking on either side of halftime to give the Reggae Boys a dominant lead. Japan has always had their opportunities, and this time they actually converted one of them, Wagner Lopez heading to Masashi Nakayama, who scored Japan's first ever World Cup goal over 250 minutes into their first campaign. Unfortunately, they couldn't find a second, and Japan would head home from their first ever World Cup with 0 points. This game shared something in common with the other two, that being that Japan was not beaten in the middle third of the field, nor on defense thanks to their hard work, but the end product was not there, and that's all the scoreboard would end up reflecting. Japan was not the worst team in France, that would be my country, the United States, but they had a lot of improvement to do if they wanted to be more competitive in their World Cup. Korea Japan 2002, it's a glorious event that some people fucking hate. But both the Koreans and especially the Japanese embraced this World Cup in a beautiful way that really added to the charm of the tournament. Soccer was still not the biggest sport in Japan by any means, but the national team hosting and winning the Asian Cup in 1992 and reaching the World Cup in 1998 definitely helped raise the sport's perception to the public. Another thing that raised soccer's popularity in the country was a very Japanese thing, literally fucking anime. Yoichi Takahashi would watch the 1978 World Cup and fall in love with the sport, and when he decided to write a manga, he would create Captain Tsubasa, a story about a young Japanese soccer player and his ambitions to become a global superstar. Bucking the idea to have Tsubasa be a baseball player, even though baseball was by far the most popular team sport in Japan at the time, Takahashi would specifically cite the amount of freedom soccer players have during a match, especially compared to the extremely rigid and mechanical positioning of baseball players. The Captain Tsubasa manga and anime were both extremely successful, more so than they had any right to be, and specifically young Japanese people fell in love with the show, idolizing Tsubasa Ozora, this fictional attacking mid who plays sorta like Maradona. That generation of Japanese boys eventually grew up, and some of them kept playing soccer. Many of them populated the J League in the 90s. This was Japan's first real generation of soccer players, and their peak would be hosting and participating in the 2002 World Cup. As co-host, Japan would automatically qualify for Korea Japan 2002, where they would get arguably the easiest group in the 32-team era. Holy shit, this would be like pretty easy for this year's World Cup. They got 2 teams out of Europe, both Russia and Belgium, and neither team was anything special. Throw in Tunisia out of North Africa and what? This group is like winnable for Japan. They haven't gotten a single point in the World Cup up to this point, but at this point there's no reason they shouldn't make the knockouts out of this. There's no excuse. Japan would go into the World Cup managed by a French dude, Philippe Troussier, who made his legacy on his excellence coaching clubs and national teams in Africa. On top of this, they had the services of arguably the best Asian player in the world at the time, an attacking mid named Hidetoshi Nakata. This guy moved from Japan out to Italy, becoming one of the first Japanese players to play in Europe, and he played on the 2000 through 2001 Roma team that won Serie A. This dude was scoring against Juventus to help decide a title race, and he was one of those many kids who was inspired to play soccer by Captain Tsubasa. Japan would open their World Cup against Belgium in front of a Japanese crowd at Saitama, and this ended up being a banger. The first half was dominated by Belgium, but the Japanese defense would hold past the break and into the second half, where it took the defense failing to clear the ball out the box and old-ass Mark Wilmot scoring a fucking bicycle kick to beat Seigo Narazaki in goal. Incredibly, Japan would hit right back with a route 1 goal if I've ever seen it, with a punt from their own side of the field turning into Takayuki Suzuki, running clear on goal and beating the Belgian keeper. This wasn't even it either, because a few minutes later Junichi Inamoto would make another great play, ghosting past Eric Van Meer with one great dribble and beating the keeper with a smooth finish. For the first time ever at the World Cup, Japan led, but not all good things can last. Van Meer, the Belgian defender who got bodied by Inamoto, played the perfect chip through to Peter van der Heyden, who got past the entire Japanese defense and beat the keeper to equalize. The record books don't remember this next part, but Junichi Inamoto 100% scored the winner in the 85th minute, but the ref ruled a foul on Inamoto's attempt to win the ball in the box, which I think was a bad call. Because of this, the game ended 2-2, still earning Japan their first ever draw and being a more than credible performance that left their campaign wide open. Next up was Russia for a reenactment of the Russo-Japanese War of the early 1900s, played in front of the home fans in Yokohama. The first half was up-tempo, and although neither team was able to score going into halftime, you could tell something was coming. Soon after the break, it came via Junichi Inamoto. Who else? When Atsushi Yanagisawa set him up just onside and he was able to beat the keeper to give Japan the lead. Russia should have equalized when one of their subs routed Narazaki and then put the ball into the side netting with an open goal. Hidetoshi Nakata would also have his first real contribution when he fired a screamer from 40 yards out that clanged off the crossbar. That would have been the greatest goal in Samurai Blue history if it would have gone. It didn't, but Russia could not find an equalizer, ending the game 1-0 in favor of Japan. For the first time in their World Cup history, Japan has won a game, and with this win, they now had one foot in the knockouts. The final game of the group was against Tunisia, this time in Osaka, and Japan dominated the first half this time to no avail. Coming out of halftime, though, they made multiple subs, and one of them, Hiroaki Morishima, scored immediately when a Tunisian defender accidentally hit the ball right to him in the box, and he was able to finish past their keeper. Morishima almost hit a sick header just a few minutes later. Shinji Ono also almost scored, but Japan would get their second goal in the 75th minute to ice the game. The other halftime sub, Daisuke Ichikawa, put in a great ball to Hidetoshi Nakata, whose header should have been saved if the keeper didn't just completely fuck it up. Very cool to see Nakata's career come full circle and see him score in the World Cup. Japan would win the game 2-0 and win the group, advancing to the knockouts for the very first time on a tsunami of momentum. After getting such an easy group and winning it, Japan's luck would continue when they would draw Turkey in the round of 16. So many times nations like Japan get stonewalled at the round of 16 with very unlucky draws against superpowers. Just ask Mexico. Turkey is a beatable team, especially with the home crowd behind them in Miyagi, the furthest north host city outside of Sapporo. The Japanese would suffer the worst start possible, though, with Umit Davala scoring a header directly off a corner in the 12th minute to put the Turks in the lead. From here, I'm not gonna lie, this really looked like one of their 1998 games. They had good midfield presence, they kept Turkey from scoring a second goal, but the end product was just not there, and it cost them dearly. Japan would bow out in the round of 16, becoming a victim in Turkey's great Cinderella run instead of continuing their own. It's bittersweet because this was a great round that proved Japan could do more than just make up the numbers, but it could have been so much more. If they had won this game, they would have played Senegal in the quarters. This path gave them such an attainable path to the semis, and it was going to be hard to replicate this in future tournaments where they don't have co-host privilege. The rise of Japanese soccer continued with qualifying for Germany in 2006, where they would begin in a group with Oman, India, and Singapore. This group was obviously a two-horse race between Japan and Oman, again, and 2 1-0 wins for Samurai Blue ensured their progress into the next round. In this next round, Japan would be drawn into one of 2 4-team groups, with the top 2 and both getting 4 tickets to the tournament. For this group, Japan would draw Iran, North Korea, and Bahrain, and they had to like their odds to get out of this one. Of course, things went well. A loss to Iran in the second game was a setback, but Japan won the rest of their games and coasted to a spot in the World Cup for now the 3rd straight cycle. Just over a decade ago, they had never reached a World Cup, and now they were doing it like it was nothing. In Germany, they were given quite the draw. Out of pot 1, Brazil, the holders and 5-time World Cup champions. Out of Europe, Croatia, a very talented team. And out of Oceania, Australia. This group feels tailor-made to give Japan a Christmas Carol type scenario, matching them up with battles against the past, present, and future. From the past, Croatia, a team that beat Japan at France '98 and a chance for revenge. From the present, Brazil, the best team in the world and a main source of inspiration for Japanese football. Brazil is one of the countries with the biggest Japanese diaspora. Tsubasa played in the Brazilian league in the anime. And of course, Japan's coach was the amazing Zico, a guy uniquely super important for both countries. They even had a naturalized Brazilian on the Japanese national team in 2006. Shouts out to Alex. From the future, Australia, a team that's about to transition into the Asian Football Confederation and become one of Japan's biggest rivals at the top. Our first game was against those Aussies and man, Japan would score in the first half when Shinsuke Nakamura lifted the ball into the box and everyone missed, including Aussie keeper Mark Schwarzer, who felt he was interfered with. Either way, the ball sailed past everyone in the box straight into the net to give the Samurai Blue a lead, and the Japanese defense would dig in and try to preserve the win. They got to the last few minutes of the game still up 1-0, only to get lost defensively on a long throw into the box and let Tim Cahill equalize late. If that was all, what a disappointing result for Japan, but it got worse. Both teams went forward trying to find a win, and Cahill would get a second goal on a great strike to give Australia the late lead. A third goal, courtesy of John Aloisi, finished off the Japanese, who had to be one of the most confused and disoriented World Cup losers of all time. They had this one wrapped up for so long, only to collapse in a very un-Japanese-like way. Japan now faced long odds of qualifying for the knockouts, needing to beat Croatia, and then even still probably needing a result against Brazil after that. Their next game was against Croatia in the summer heat of Nuremberg, and Samurai Blue wilted in the sun. Croatia dominated the game, winning a penalty early that goalie Yoshikatsu Kawaguchi would luckily save off the boot of Dario Serna. Japan would grow into the match from here, but good God was this game dull other than the penalty save. The game would finish 0-0, and this was the worst kind of game. Not only did this totally fuck Croatia, and it made our eyes burn as viewers, but this result basically eliminated Japan too. They were still mathematically in the hunt, at least they didn't lose, but now they needed to beat Brazil and hope for a wonky result in the other game, and they're kind of looking at long odds for any of that. Japan versus Brazil was really something. From a geopolitical perspective, I love the comparison between this game and Croatia versus Australia on the other side of the group. Their situations kind of hold a mirror up to each other. This game started unbelievably, with Japan taking an early lead on a near post finish from KJ Tomada and damn near taking that lead into halftime. Then Brazil made one nice play before the break and it finished with Ronaldo heading home past Kawaguchi. The Samba boys maintained the beat after halftime, hitting Japan for 3 more goals, including a brace for R9, and that was that. Japan lost 4-1. It was an entertaining game, but Japan was now officially eliminated from the World Cup, bottom of their group with 1 point to their name. It's definitely went better than France '98 at least, but it's kind of a whimper for this generation to go out with. They were back-to-back Asian Cup champions. They had made a real splash in the World Cup 4 years ago, but with the surprise retirement of Hidetoshi Nakata at the young age of 29, we were officially transitioning into a new era of Japanese soccer. Qualifying for South Africa 2010 started with Japan drawn into a group with Oman again somehow, Bahrain who lost in the Intercontinental Playoffs for Germany '06, Thailand's here too. Top 2 qualify, and yet Japan somehow made hard work of this. They lost their second game in Rifa, Bahrain 1-0, and as a result they spent the rest of their campaign in second place in the group before pulling away from Oman late, nicking the group by beating Bahrain in the home leg. For the next round, Japan would be drawn into a group with Bahrain again, Qatar, Uzbekistan, and the team that advanced ahead of them in Germany, the Aussies. This group ended up being low-key a breeze for both Australia and Japan. An unfortunate home draw with Uzbekistan and 0-0 at home against Australia aren't amazing results, but Japan otherwise went undefeated in this double round robin until the very last game in Melbourne, by which time they had already clinched their spot in the World Cup for the 4th consecutive time. In South Africa, Japan would get a pretty manageable group, drawing the Netherlands out of Pot 1, Denmark out of Europe, and Cameroon out of Central Africa. The common consensus on this group leaned towards the Dutch dominating, Denmark and Cameroon going head-to-head for that second knockout spot, and Japan lurking as a dark horse but expected to finish at the bottom again. I was just getting into soccer at this time, but I don't remember hearing any noise about Japan coming into this tournament. Then they played their first group game in Bloemfontein against Cameroon, and that all changed. Japan scored before the end of the first half when Daisuke Matsui put in a cross that found Keisuke Honda at the far post for the easy finish. Honda's the guy to know. Honda's the guy to know in this year's team. He had just moved to CSKA Moscow and was another great Japanese playmaker who was versatile in where he could play on the field and what he could do. Cameroon may have had the guy considered the best player on the pitch at the time, Inter Milan striker Samuel Eto'o, but Honda was the only guy able to produce a goal in this game. Japan pulling this stunner put them firmly in the race for second along with Denmark, who they played in their final group game. First, though, they had to play the Netherlands in Game 2, one of the title favorites at this World Cup, and Japan played them well. The defense was stubborn, they held out for the entire first half, and despite the Dutch having some great opportunities, they should have held out for the second half as well. Instead, Wesley Sneijder popped a shot off from outside the box in the 53rd minute, and it should have been an easy save for Eiji Kawashima. Nope, he misjudged the flight of the ball and let it in, giving the Dutch the only goal they needed to win this one and making one of many huge goalkeeper gaffes at this tournament. Japan had played well in this one, but they came up just short of the result and now had to either beat or draw Denmark in their last game to go through. Denmark versus Japan, this is a big one. This game was lively from the start, and Japan was able to find a breakthrough on a fucking gorgeous free kick from Honda.
Sorensen has been beaten by the shot from...
Then Per Kroljup had to stop a Japanese attack by fouling and conceding both a free kick and a yellow card. Then Yasuhito Endo stepped up for the free kick, and guess what?
How about that? Yasuhito Endo.
2 awesome direct free kick goals like this in one game anywhere is amazing. Ask me how excited I was when Declan Rice put Real Madrid into the shadow realm last year. But 2 free kicks in the first half of a game at the fucking 2010 World Cup, the Italia 90 of my generation, with the dumb, stupid Jabulani. Fucking crazy work from Japan, who now led Denmark 2-0 in a winner-take-all game. What the fuck? This is insane. This wasn't like Denmark's best team or anything. Their star striker was Nicholas fucking Bentner. But this is not how people thought this was going to go. Denmark would strike back late in the game when Jon Dahl Tomasson stepped up for a penalty, saw it saved by Kawashima, but then was actually fortunate enough to be able to follow up the rebound by putting the ball into the back of the net. Denmark still needed 2 goals to go through though, and Japan would take the initiative from here and actually scored a 3rd goal when Honda set up Shinji Okazaki in front of goal. Japan won 3-1. They were on to the knockouts for the first time on foreign soil. This is huge. In the round of 16, Japan would get a gift of a drawn matchup with Paraguay and Pretoria. And the way this game went sort of proved that Paraguay was not on the same level as most of the other group winners. The beginning of the game was pretty even, both teams had some opportunities, but Japan was settled into a defensive mindset and Paraguay did not have the firepower to break them down. The game went to halftime 0-0, finished at that score after 90, and even after another 30 minutes of extra time, 0-0. In penalties, Yuichi Kamano would smash Japan's 3rd penalty off the crossbar, giving Paraguay an advantage they'd never drop. Japan conceded 0 goals in the game and only missed 1 single penalty, but that was all it took to sink their ship. Paraguay was moving on to the quarters, and Japan was out in the round of 16 for the 2nd time. Of course, this was still a great run, and it gave a lot of hope for this generation moving forward. Qualifying for Brazil 2014 began in a 4-team group with Uzbekistan, North Korea, and Tajikistan, and they would coast to an automatic spot along with Uzbekistan, and these 2 had the top 2 locked down the whole time. Even though they lost their last 2 games, it doesn't even matter. Japan would advance in second anyway to make it to the next group stage. Here, Japan would be drawn with Australia, Iraq, Jordan, and Oman, with the top 2 advancing directly. Once again, the Japanese had no issue getting out of this group. Wins in 4 of their first 5 games had them advancing to the World Cup, no issue. Japan would once again get a pretty kind group draw in Brazil, getting Colombia out of Pot 1, Greece out of Europe, and Cote d'Ivoire out of Africa. I would say once again Japan was considered the weakest out of these 4 teams. That's what my opinion was going in as well. But qualification was not out of the question if Japan got the right results. Japan's first game was against Ivory Coast, and they took the lead pretty early on this blast of a shot by Keisuke Honda. The Ivorians took control of the match from here, pouring on in search for an equalizer, but failing to find one for the rest of the first half. Japan was looking good for so long, up until Cote d'Ivoire subbed in their talisman, Didier Drogba. Even though the injured Drogba himself didn't do anything, his inspiration immediately led to back-to-back header goals from Wilfried Bony and Gervinho, both on assists from Serge Aurier. Japan had nothing for the rest of the match, falling 2-1 and seeing their qualification hopes take a big dent. Game 2 was against Greece in the coastal city of Natal, and I'd rather shoot myself in the head with a gun than rewatch all 90 minutes of this game. A Greek player was sent off in the first half. That's all I got. Japan had some chances to win this game but didn't take any of them, ending the game 0-0. Greece didn't mind this result, but this was awful for Japan, who needed all 3 points in this one to even have a chance of advancing. Now they had to beat Colombia, and that was going to be easier said than done given what just happened here and given what Colombia had been doing all tournament up to this point. The good news for Japan was that their last game against Colombia would be against a weaker Cafeteros side without James in their starting lineup. The bad news is that it was still Colombia who would win the penalty early in the game and take the lead through Juan Cuadrado. Japan would get their equalizer literally right at halftime when Honda found Okazaki for a nice header, but the second half was all Colombia. James came onto the pitch in the second half, and not too long after, Los Cafeteros would take the lead through our Jackson Martinez goal assisted by James. Martinez got a late brace on with a goal on the counter, and James would also score just for shits. Final score 4-1. Japan had just gotten ripped apart limb by limb like only Brazil had done to them in any World Cup prior. Needless to say, Samurai Blue were eliminated from the World Cup and eliminated in shocking fashion. Honda is basically the only Japanese player that showed up for this tournament. Shinji Kagawa, another attacking mid that was in his prime at this point and was one of my favorite players to watch in the world, Lil Homie did fuck all in Brazil. Time marches forward and Japan's attempt at qualifying for Russia 2018 started in a group with Syria, Singapore, Cambodia, and Afghanistan. What a bizarre fucking group. But Japan would win every game here apart from a random ass 0-0 draw with Singapore at home, and they would move on to the next group stage. In this one, they were drawn with Australia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Iraq, and Thailand. This did not start nearly as well, with Japan beginning the group with a home loss to the Emirates? Really, guys? I remember being concerned that a Japanese soccer dark age was upon us, but they would rebound after this and win 3 of their next 4 to sit tied with the Saudis on top of the group. Through the second half of games, Japan would actually pull away from the Aussies and Saudis, who both had some sloppy results, while Japan beat Australia and only had a draw against Iraq and neutral Tehran as far as suboptimal results. Japan had a spot in the World Cup locked up after match day 9, making this now the 6th consecutive World Cup Japan would qualify for. In Russia, Japan would get a fascinating draw. Out of Pot 1, a Colombia team considered dark horses to win the World Cup. Out of Europe, an unpopular Eastern European lolcow that everyone hated for their passivity and lack of attacking ambition. Out of Africa, a team from West Africa being hyped up as a potential knockout team led by one of the best players in the world. This is truly a Doofenshmirtz moment because, yeah, that describes their last draw as well. That aside, obviously, you really can't complain about drawing Colombia, Poland, and Senegal for your group here. At worst, Colombia pulls away and you're still in a 3-team race for second place instead of being stuck in a group with Portugal and Spain or some bullshit. Russia 2018 begins where Brazil 2014 ended for Japan, that is a match against Colombia. This one could not have been more different, and that became obvious in literally the 3rd minute when Kaga was shot on goal. Yeah, that's crazy. And he had it stopped by the fist of Colombian defender Carlos Sanchez. You're obviously not allowed to do that, and not only would Sanchez become the 2nd fastest red card in World Cup history, but Kagawa would convert the penalty and put Samurai Blue in the lead with now a man advantage as well. Unfortunately, they would concede this lead by halftime with Juan Quintero's shot crossing the line by the time keeper Eiji Kawashima was able to save the shot, but Japan learned from their previous World Cup mistakes and actually pushed in the second half for a winner. They would find it in the 73rd minute on a corner that led directly to a header goal from Yuya Osaka. Despite Colombian pressure, Japan would hold on for this historic 2-1 win that at the time stood as the country's most impressive win at the World Cup yet. It put the Samurais in great position to advance into the knockouts, and the world was watching now. Game 2 against Senegal was a great one. These two teams probably weren't expecting this to be a top-of-the-table clash, but it was a clash indeed. The great Sadio Mane got a rebound goal to give Senegal the lead early, but Japan were able to level it by halftime on a great strike by Takashi Inui. Senegal would take the lead again in the second half through Musa Wage, but once again Japan found an equalizer, and this time it was the great Keisuke Honda, now scoring in his 3rd different World Cup, this time as a substitute. This was a pretty even game, and the fact that it ended in a draw was both fair and also completely left the group wide open, outside of eliminated Poland. Japan would match up against Poland in their 3rd game, and Poland was playing in their now traditional match of honor. The first half was normal, somewhat exciting soccer, even though no goals were scored. Then early in the second half, Poland would take the lead through Jan Bednarek, and suddenly it looked like Japan would go out. Colombia and Senegal were tied in the other game, at least until Yerry Mina scored in the 74th minute to give Colombia the lead. This was enough for Japan to change tactics. Japan and Senegal were tied on points, tied on goal difference, tied on head-to-head, and tied in goals scored. The next tiebreaker was fair play. How many yellow cards have you accumulated? Random as fuck, but Japan has fewer. If both scorelines held, Japan will be going through by the most bullshit of margins. It wasn't honorable at all, but Japan would park the bus and play anti-football for the last 15 minutes of their game. They got booed, but they didn't need to beat Poland. Losing 1-0 was enough to see Japan through to the knockouts for their third time in their history. In the knockouts, Japan would match up against the great golden generation of Belgium, and this ended up being one of the greatest World Cup games I've ever watched. The first half saw no goals, but the second half popped the fuck off. A through ball from Gaku Shibasaki beat Jan Vertonghen and set up Genki Haraguchi for a really nice goal and a 1-0 lead. Eden Hazard hit back immediately and hit the post, but the response here ended up coming from Japan. Kagawa gave the ball to Inui, who let it rip and beat Thibaut Courtois. Japan was now up 2-0 and looking at a historic win and a historic achievement. Unfortunately, as we all know, the football gods are cruel and sadistic and love reveling in the pain of the underdogs and the rootable characters of the sport. Jan Vertonghen would make good on his mistake by hitting an unbelievable header. I still don't know how he did this. Eden Hazard set up freaking Marouane Fellaini with a free header in front of goal for an equalizer, and the last 20 minutes or so of this game were absolute chaos. Both teams poured forward looking for a winner. This game was end-to-end as all hell, and both teams had great opportunities. At the end of the game, Courtois stopped a 40-yard free kick from Honda, then grabbed a corner and started one last counter. Japan was helpless. Belgium had all of the passes, all of the numbers, and none of Japan's defenders could do a damn thing about it. Nasser Chadli finished the goal, and the collapse was complete. Japan had one foot in the door to the quarters, and they saw the door slammed shut. That is super unfortunate, and it was also the end for this generation. This was the last World Cup for Honda, Kagawa, Inui, Kawashima. These are sad times, but on the other side, holy shit is this current generation of Japanese soccer players talented. Their first run would be for Qatar 2022. Qualifying saw them start by winning 8 of 8 in a group with Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, and Myanmar. This advanced them into a group with Australia, Saudi Arabia, China, Oman again, and Vietnam. This started horribly for Japan as they lost at home 1-0 against the freaking Omanis, and after a road win against China, they lost another 1-0 game in Jeddah against the Saudis. Japan sat in a 3-way tie for third place, a full 6 points behind both the Aussies and Saudis. And then they won their next 6 games and cruised to a top 2 spot, only falling out of first place on their last match day. After making it to Qatar, the Japanese would finally pay karma for all of these pretty forgiving group draws of the past because they got both Spain and Germany, and also Costa Rica. But Spain and Germany, the Samurai Blue really had their work cut out for them. They would begin with the Germans at Al Rayyan, and a result here would go a long way. Japan was competitive in this game early, but the Germans would take a 1-0 lead into halftime thanks to a penalty conceded by the Japanese keeper Shuichi Ganda. Ilkay Gundogan converted it, and the Japanese were facing a Game 1 defeat going into the second 45. The second half saw Japan grow back into the game as their manager, Hajime Moriyasu, made impactful subs. Bringing on Takuma Asano and Kara Mutoma gave the attack some teeth, and Ganda made some good saves to keep the deficit at 1. They should have broke through in the 73rd minute when Manuel Neuer made a great save on the shot from Junya Ito, and the rebound came straight to Hiroki Sakai, but he missed the open net from a few yards out and got subbed off right away as a result. Just a few minutes later though, Japan finally found their equalizer. Mitoma found the perfect pass in for Takumi Minamino, who had literally just been subbed on for Sakai. Minamino shot and Neuer spilled it, with the ball falling right to another substitute, Ritsu Doan. The man on his way out at PSV would do what Sakai couldn't and hit the rebound to equalize the game and give German soccer fans some Vietnam-level flashbacks. Japan kept the pressure on, and a long free kick down the right found a sprinting Takuma Asano a few minutes later. Asano would beat Nico Schlotterbeck for pace and maintain his run all the way to goal, where from a tough near-post angle he was able to somehow beat Neuer and smash Japan into the lead. This was exhilarating to watch, and to see Japan rewarded for their enterprising play and taking home all 3 points was so satisfying. Samurai Blue were now in the driver's seat to reach the knockouts out of this group ahead of their second game, also in Al Rayyan against Costa Rica. In their first game, Los Ticos were beaten and battered 7-0 by Spain, so expectations were that Japan should win this one despite Moriyasu making 5 changes to the lineup that started against Die Mannschaft. Was this pragmatic or overconfident? Whatever the answer was, this backfired horribly. Ironically, given what just happened, Japan had all the possession but couldn't put any of their chances away, And in the 81st minute, on Costa Rica's first shot on goal of the entire tournament, Shuichi Ganda misjudged the shot from Keisher Fuller and couldn't keep it out of goal. Los Ticos had taken the shock lead, and they would keep it with some insane saves and blocks. Japan lost 1-0. They had just undone all the good work from beating one of the most talented teams of the World Cup by now losing to one of the least talented teams at this World Cup. This was a shocking backslide, and now this meant they had to get a result against Spain in order to get through to the knockouts. This Spain team was so good, and they were also fighting for their lives after only getting a draw against Germany. We've already talked about the final match day in this group once in this series in the Germany video, but good God. Spain took the lead early when Cesar Azpilicueta put in the perfect cross for Alvaro Morata to put it home, but just like against Germany, the Japanese would stay in this game, weathering the storm and getting to halftime 1-0. After getting dominated in the first half, Moriyasu would make 2 subs, one of them Ritsu Doan, and out of nowhere, Doan would score a great goal capitalizing off a defensive error and poor goalkeeping from Unai Simon. Just a few minutes later, they would score again, and goddamn, this did not look like a good goal in motion. The ball is so close to being out of bounds before the final cross into out Tanaka, but VAR would award Tanaka and Japan the lead on a controversial goal. When they were losing at halftime, Japan was sitting in 3rd place in the group, 45 minutes away from elimination. Just a few minutes after this restart though, and Japan was now sitting in 1st place as long as they were able to hold on to this result. They managed to take the air out of most of the match after this, with Spain kicking into gear way too late and not being able to find an equalizer. Somehow, someway, Japan managed to beat both Germany and Spain to win the group despite losing to Costa Rica. What the fuck? It's one of the oddest group stage wins ever, but it's the second time Japan has ever won their group, and that counts for something. The first time they won their group was the Group of Life in 2002, and no shade to the Japanese team, but this is like an exponentially more impressive accomplishment. This won Japan a matchup with 28 runners-up Croatia in the round of 16, and this was now their 3rd chance to beat the Checker Boys here in the World Cup. This was a close one in the first half, with Japan being more than game, and they would strike first before halftime when a short corner led to a vicious cross from Doan, and the ball eventually following to Maeda, who was able to finish past Dominik Livakovic to give Japan a 1-0 lead for the first time in Qatar. Unfortunately for Japan, that lead wouldn't last long because Croatia would equalize on the other side of halftime on a great header from Ivan Perisic that was set up by an even better assist from Dejan Lovren. The game kind of fell off after this, marching on to extra time, still tied at 1-1, and there was no goal to be found in the extra 30 minutes either. For the second time ever, Japan was heading to a penalty shootout with their World Cup on the line. First up was Minamino, and his take was bad. Livakovic saved it easily, and Nikola Vlasic would hit past Gana to give Croatia the lead. When Matoma saw his pen also saved, and Marcelo Brozovic hit, that was a really bad sign. Asano would hit on his, and Marco Livaya would hit the post on his attempt to keep the Japanese in the shootout. And that's where the captain, the veteran Maya Yoshida, would step up and see his shot also saved by Livakovic. There's just nothing you can do about this. Dominik Livakovic was on a fucking heater in goal. The pen from Yoshida wasn't amazing either. I mean, so it is what it is. And Mario Pasalic would finish to give Croatia the 3-1 penalty shootout win. Japan was out in the round of 16 again, in heartbreaking fashion again. That was such a bummer, but there's hope for this generation. Never has Japan had such a deep team full of guys playing in the top European leagues. There are just so many good technical players on this team. They're so much fun to watch. There'll be here no problem for North America 2026 too. Japan will win 6 of 6 against North Korea, Syria, and Myanmar to advance to the group stages, where they just needed to finish top 2 in a group with Australia, Saudi Arabia, China, Indonesia, and Bahrain. I swear it feels like all of these groups were always the same for Japan at this stage. Asian qualifying had gotten a lot easier now that 48 teams make the World Cup, with 9 teams getting in from Asia this year, and Japan had no issues becoming one of those 9 teams. They only got 1 point against the Aussies and drew 0-0 at home against Saudi Arabia, but they won their other 7 games to easily win the group and advance to the World Cup. In North America, Japan would be dealt no favors with their group draw. They got the Netherlands out of pot 1, Tunisia out of pot 3, and eventually Sweden out of pot 4. This group is winnable, yet if Japan ends up in 3rd place, are we really going to be that shocked? This feels like a super unpredictable team, one that has a lot of hype coming into this tournament. I'm definitely excited for them to see what happens. Japan is one of my favorite teams to watch, but I'm personally trying to temper my expectations here, especially after seeing the group. We'll see what happens. Japan has a lot of class players. Literally anything's on the table for these guys. Thank you all for watching. That was video number 22 of 48, detailing every World Cup history of every World Cup team here in North America. and that was a big one. I wanted to do Japan justice here. Like I said, they're one of my favorites. Their run as a national team has been good so far, and it really feels like their best days are ahead of them, and that's so exciting. This was a lot of fun to do a video like this where it's basically just a slow climb the entire time. We're still on the ascent as we get to the end of the video. I don't know, a lot of these other ones are just kind of helter-skelter. It's not really, doesn't really hit the same. But anyways, we've finally ended our run of 5 nations in 5 days that I have a huge soft spot for. I will be 100% rooting for Cote d'Ivoire, Ecuador, Curaçao, the Netherlands, and Japan wholeheartedly. I hope that passion has come through in these past 5 videos, because low-key is probably not going to be there tomorrow, because we're talking about Tunisia, who might have like the most boring history at the World Cup ever. So that is what it is. But we're going to break down their history, and we're going to have a fun time doing it. So stay tuned, and please subscribe. I've put a lot of work into this.